air war in Vietnam. Sleek jets wielding high-tech missiles ruled the sky. To many, the gun is a useless relic of a bygone era. But they couldn't be more wrong. Brutal air combat over Southeast Asia proves pilots still need to put lead on target to survive. Now you're in the cockpit as American pilots take aim and pull the trigger in some of the most heart-pounding dogfights of the modern age. Experience the battle. Dissect the tactics. The gun kills of Vietnam. Next on Dogfights. June 20th, 1965. The dawn of the air war in Vietnam. 4 prop-driven A-1 Sky Raiders launched from the carrier Midway droned into hostile skies. They're flying in support of a rescue operation.
There was an Air Force pilot who was down in far northwest North Vietnam, and they really wanted to make an effort to get him out.
The lumbering Sky Raiders are not there to dogfight. Their mission? Use their powerful 20mm cannons to ward off enemy ground troops. But little do they know, they're on a rendezvous with history. The first air-to-air gun kill of the Vietnam War. Lieutenant Clinton Johnson flies number 3, Element Lead. His radio is damaged. He can't communicate with flight leader Ed Greathouse. Miles from their mission objective, the lead element unexpectedly snaps over and dives for the deck. Johnson wings over and follows. He's missed something big.
I noticed we're getting steeper and steeper, and we were reversing course, and I thought, well, we're not anywhere near the pilot yet. I wonder what's going on.
Johnson instinctively scans the jungle floor for threats.
I always had a policy, if the nose was pointing at the ground, the guns were armed, so I armed all my weaponry.
Suddenly, a bright streak of yellow outside his canopy.
I saw one go by, and I thought, that looks like a SAM, but it's going up to down, and SAMs go down to up. Then I saw another missile go by, and it hit the ground in front of Ed Greathouse, so we're down pretty low by now.
Two North Vietnamese MiG-17s have the drop on the Sky Raiders. The leader is going after Johnson.
Shortly thereafter, I looked in my mirror, and there was a guy firing at me.
The MiG is spewing out a lethal arc of 37mm and 23mm cannon fire.
I could see the 2 different sizes of tracers going by. The 37s, when they're burning, they're about the size of a tennis ball going by. That's what they look like. The other ones look like fiery golf balls.
Clint Johnson has been jumped by an enemy jet with almost every advantage in a dogfight. Something his Sky Raider was never intended to do. The Douglas A-1 Sky Raider was developed as a dive bomber at the end of World War II. Only its versatility has kept it in service. The Sky Raider's piston engine is far more fuel efficient than a jet. It can stay over target areas for hours at a time, ideal for ground attack and rescue ops. But low and slow means loitering over relentless enemy ground fire.
jet guys gave us a lot of grief, being old prop pilots, and that made us more aggressive, I think. We were just a tiny bit wilder.
The Skyraider's chief assets are its guns. It is armed with 4 M3 20mm cannons. Each cannon fires 12 4.5-ounce projectiles every second. A 3-second burst from the 4 guns delivers nearly 150 high-explosive rounds on target. But the Skyraider's cannons are optimized for its ground attack role. They are not connected to a lead computing gun sight. The Skyraider is not designed for air-to-air combat, let alone with a premier dogfighter like the Soviet-built MiG-17.
The adversary, the MiG-17, was very small, agile, maneuverable, had cannons, 2 different cannons.
The MiG-17 is a single-seat fighter, developed in the 1950s, nearly a decade after the Skyraider. The jet-powered MiG is far superior in the key aspects of speed and climb rate. Its weapons system is designed for air-to-air combat. A single hit from its 37mm cannon could obliterate a Skyraider. But the Skyraider has one small advantage. Slower prop-driven aircraft can make much tighter turns than high-speed jets. With MiG-17s hot on Johnson's tail, he'll have to outturn his enemies to survive. The Skyraiders take violent evasive action. The lead element pulls hard to the right. Johnson and wingman Charles Hartman brake hard left. The flight is split. Johnson's wings are nearly vertical in the high G turn. His airspeed plummets, but the Skyraider is built to handle this kind of maneuver. The A-1's thick, wide wing generates more lift than the MiG's swept wing. Johnson can stay aloft at extremely slow speed. The MiG cannot. The Skyraiders pull tight circular turns. The high-speed MiG can only match the turn for a split second before he overshoots, pulls up, and re-engages. Johnson strains to look over his shoulder. The enemy pilot can't get a shot.
He would pull inside of our turn, drop his nose and fire, but he couldn't hold it. And you'd see the tracers fall away, and then you'd relax a little, he'd pull harder, and he'd fire again.
After several attempts, the frustrated MiG breaks off. Wingman Charles Hartman squeezes off a burst. The enemy jet easily pulls away.
He roared by us and started to climb and went up to about 10,000 feet and sat up there.
Johnson and Hartman frantically scan the horizon for the other Americans.
I figured we'd better rejoin with our flight leader. You know, that was Navy doctrine. You never split the flight if you can help it.
They hug the treetops and race around a small hill. Johnson spots the lead element. They're in trouble. Johnson and Hartman are here. A MiG-17 is here, positioned to strike the other Skyraiders. The enemy jet opens fire. Johnson must act fast to save the other Americans. With no air-to-air missiles, he lashes out with the only weapons he has, his cannons.
We had a 90-degree deflection on him. I fired a very short burst. I knew I wasn't going to hit him, but I got his attention.
But now the MiG snaps violently around to the right.
He turned into us, head on.
Johnson has saved his flight, but he's put himself and his wingman in mortal danger. The communist MiG bores in for the kill at 450 miles per hour. Johnson's finger is poised on the trigger. There's never been an air-to-air gun kill in the Vietnam War. For the Americans, it's make history or die. June 20th, 1965. A-1 Skyraider pilots Clint Johnson and Charles Hartman are face-to-face with a fire-breathing MiG-17. The MiG is in perfect attack position. Its best move would be to nose up into the vertical, where it can use its speed advantage to make slashing attacks. But surprisingly, the MiG continues dead ahead, splitting his offensive fire between the two Skyraiders. A split-second head-on pass will decide who lives and who dies.
On the Skyraider was a real trigger. It pulled like a regular gun trigger on the stick.
High explosive rounds punish the MiG.
He actually went between Charlie and me. And Charlie was pretty close to me. I thought I was going to hit him. I thought we were going to have a midair. It was close. I felt a thump as I went by him. I had a feeling that maybe the pilot was dead before he hit the ground. No attempt to eject.
The Skyraiders have done the impossible. The two outdated piston-driven workhorses have claimed an enemy jet with their guns. The Americans look down at the flaming wreckage in the jungle.
Right then, I got my radio back. And Greathouse said, "Are you two idiots still in there?" And he was out by the water by that time almost. And we said, "Yeah, we're still in here." He said, "Well, you got 10 unfriendlies coming your way."
Johnson and Hartman make a beeline for the carrier. They will share credit for the historic victory. In an era when long-range air-to-air missiles were supposed to reign supreme, the Skyraider pilots proved that the lowly gun can still make the critical difference in a dogfight. But by 1965, dogfighting was no longer a top concern, as new weapons technology was expected to make close-in air combat a thing of the past.
Aircraft weapons have evolved from World War I, where there was a single or two nose-mounted machine guns on a biplane fighter, to World War II, where a mix of weapons were placed both in the nose and wing of the fighter aircraft. Some countries, like the UK, went to 8 smaller machine guns. The United States often used 6 or 8 larger 50 caliber machine guns, and then Germany and Japan used a mix of machine guns and cannon. These were all with the objective of achieving a weight of fire to destroy the enemy bomber or fighter.
As aircraft modernized and grew more rugged, it became clear that 50 caliber machine guns lacked critical stopping power. The shift began toward larger aircraft guns with calibers above 15 millimeter, classified as cannons. But in the mid-50s, the need for cannons was called into question as newer weapons came online.
technology advanced significantly, and many fighters were now carrying missiles and radars. It caused some designers to say, let's leave the gun out of the airplane because of weight and the fact that these new missiles would be able to do the job.
Introduced in 1960, the supersonic F-4 Phantom quickly became the front-line fighter of the United States Navy and Air Force. It packed two primary offensive weapons, the long-range radar-guided AIM-7 Sparrow missile and the shorter-range AIM-9 heat-seeking Sidewinder missile, but no gun. But as the air war over North Vietnam went hot, F-4s were quickly dragged into maneuvering fights with less technologically advanced dogfighters like the MiG-17. Their missiles were unreliable at close range. For close-in dogfighting, the F-4 Phantom needed a gun.
In terms of air-to-air combat, it would be nice, just like land combat, to be able to have a rifle, a pistol, and a knife, i.e. an AIM-7 Sparrow, an AIM-9 Sidewinder missile, and a gun to use when it's needed in the right condition.
After months of debate, in May of 1967, Air Force top brass decides to add a gun to the Phantom. Not a moment too soon. May 22nd, 1967. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Titus leads a flight of F-4 Phantoms on an escort mission over North Vietnam. These are among the first gun-equipped Phantoms, escorting 16 F-105 fighter bombers to their target, a supply depot near Hanoi. It's a stretch of sky teeming with MiGs. Titus's flight is high and to the right of the thuds.
I could look down and see them, and I was far enough out to where I could not have to divert my attention entirely to them, where I could scan the sky visually.
The colonel's backseater, the second pilot who mans the radar and radio controls, is First Lieutenant Milan Zimmer.
I'm on the radar scope, and I'm trying to pick out any contacts that are out in front of the strike flight, so that we at least have a warning if there's something out there.
It appears to be business as usual. But a lethal threat is streaking in behind the Phantoms at over 600 miles per hour. Two gleaming MiG-21s bore in to attack. Titus is here, 1,000 feet above the bombers. Two MiG-21s are here, behind Titus. The MiGs will mount a hit-and-run attack, fire their heat-seeking ATOL missiles, then streak away to avoid a fight.
I looked over my shoulder, and here came two MiGs firing missiles. I immediately called a brake, and we turned hard left.
The enemy missiles fail to guide and dart past. The MiGs firewall the throttle and zoom climb. Titus banks right and kicks in full afterburner.
I felt bloodlust. I'm after them. I mean, now they're the target. Turnabout's fair play.
The MiGs claw for altitude. The Phantom's twin engines roar. The chase is on. May 22nd, 1967. F-4 pilots Lieutenant Colonel Robert Titus and Lieutenant Milan Zimmer are hot on the tail of a pair of MiG-21s. The aircraft are climbing at an incredible rate, 80 stories every second. Titus's twin engines pump out double the thrust of the enemy jet. He's closing fast. Though his F-4 is equipped with a gun, the weapon is not his first priority.
My focus is closing on this MiG, getting in position to fire a missile.
In the back seat of the F-4, Zimmer works the radar controls furiously, trying to get a radar lock for a Sparrow missile shot. In the front seat, Titus waits to get good tone for the heat-seeking Sidewinder.
Bob gets a good growl on the AIM-9 missile. It's, I mean, a real loud growl. Fires the missile.
As the Sidewinder slides off the rail, the MiG streaks into the clouds.
And the missile tracks right into the same hole that the MiG went into.
And it went right up his tailpipe and he exploded. I didn't see the explosion, but as we went through the thin cirrus deck, there was debris and smoke and stuff in the air.
One MiG down, one to go. Titus applies right rudder to get the MiG in his crosshairs. He orders Zimmer to go bore sight, meaning lock the radar antenna in line with the gun sight. Titus fires a Sparrow missile. The MiG pilot reacts smartly.
Well, he saw us coming and he turned hard left and started down.
And that's when the dogfight really began.
Titus rolls left and pitches down to give chase. The force of G shoves the Phantom pilots back in their seats. The F-4 screams into a power dive. The MiG pilot throws his aircraft all over the sky to shake his deadly shadow.
And it was some very high G maneuvers, right and left, up and down, at probably 550 to 600 miles an hour. I mean, we were smoking. It was one hell of a show.
The lower the MiG gets, the more it blends in with scattered reflections from the ground. Titus's missiles cannot lock onto the target. A skilled pilot flying the premier fighter of the Soviet bloc is no easy mark. The Soviet-built MiG-21 is a single-seat fighter capable of Mach 2, a worthy adversary to the F-4. The MiG-21 is lighter and more agile, but cannot outrun the more powerful Phantom. The MiG's intense maneuvering can defeat any of Titus's missiles. But this F-4 is packing a gun.
What was found in early Vietnam air combat was it would be nice to have the AIM-7, the AIM-9, and a cannon so that you covered all the elements of the potential air combat. Once it was discovered that a gun was needed, a bunch of activities took place. One was the design of a gun pod, the SU-16, which was centerline mounted like a fuel tank.
At the heart of the Su-16 was an M61A1 six-barreled 20mm rotary cannon, which operated like a Gatling gun. Power was provided to the cannon by a ram air turbine that popped out into the Phantom's slipstream. As the turbine rotated, an electric current was generated sufficient to spin the barrels. The cannon was capable of an astonishing rate of fire, over 6,000 rounds per minute. But the gun pod had several major drawbacks.
The problem was that the centerline fuel tank was taken off to make room for the gun pod, so the aircraft went out and had 600 gallons less fuel. In addition, it was not optimized, the gun pod, to the gun sight. So really it was kind of a spray and hope philosophy rather than an accurate system.
Regardless of its limitations, Phantom pilots now had a weapon to fall back on when their missiles failed. Bob Titus flips the master arm switch for his M61A1 cannon. On the belly of his F4, the turbine spins in the slipstream. Titus's gun is primed and ready. His gun sight is worthless. He'll need a hunter's instinct to take the MiG down.
Every time I tried to get lead on him, he'd reverse, thereby spoiling my aim.
The closer Titus and Zimmer get to the ground, the more immediate the danger.
Flak was all around us. I mean, it was everywhere. We had gray flak, black flak, it was all over the place.
Two surface-to-air missiles streak up towards the F4.
I look out the canopy and here's this big telephone pole coming up. I instinctively ducked my head because the missile appeared to be close to me. I don't think Titus saw it. I'm not sure if he did or not.
I was too focused on the MiG to be concerned with that. My job was to get the MiG.
The MiG pilot is running out of options. Titus is closing in. The MiG rolls wings level and begins a high G pullout. Bob Titus yanks back on the stick, straining to pull his nose in front of the MiG. He must compensate for the increased deflection of an externally mounted gun.
I didn't know how much lead to put on him, so I just put the pipper at his 12 o'clock position, pulled the trigger, and ran a buzzsaw through him.
Bullets rip through the length of the MiG-21.
M61 Gatling gun fires 6,000 rounds per minute. So pull the trigger, it goes boom. That's about 50 rounds of 20 millimeter high explosive incendiary and armor piercing incendiary.
Titus pitches up to keep from overshooting.
Went high right and pulled G's and came back around on him again. Put the pipper on him, tried to do it again, and the gun had jammed.
But the Americans have already done enough damage.
Looking, and the MiG is floating like this. We got him, he's going in. The pilot didn't get out.
Robert Titus and Milan Zimmer have just killed 2 MiGs in a single air battle. The second victory, the gun kill, validates the recent argument that F-4s should carry a cannon, in addition to their air-to-air missiles. Over the next few months, F-4 Phantoms arriving in service in Vietnam have new, updated gun pods. The Su-23 gun pod was an improved follow-on to the Su-16. During combat testing of the Su-16, pilots found that at low speeds, the ram air turbine that powered the cannon failed to produce enough energy to spin the barrels. The new Su-23 featured a more reliable, self-powered cannon and a lead computing gun sight. Having a reliable gun meant that Phantom pilots could be more aggressive in engaging the enemy. Captain D. Simmons is one such pilot, and on November 6, 1967, he'll prove that an aggressive F-4 pilot armed with a gun is a lethal combination. November 6, 1967. Air Force Captain Darrell D. Simmons, with backseater Captain George McKinney, leads Sapphire Flight. It's one of 2 flights of F-4s escorting an F-105 fighter bomber force to their targets in North Vietnam. Simmons is perched above the bombers, scanning the sky for enemy threats. His radio crackles to life with a warning from radar control.
Two flights of MiG-17s about 30 miles south of you, and the MiG-21s are about 250 at 30.
Roger.
The MiG-21s pose the greater threat. The captain gives the order to drop tanks, then brakes his flight hard left to head them off. In the back seat of the Phantom, George McKinney struggles to get a radar lock.
So you can take him up. I'm fine, but
there were a lot of clouds that day, especially in this sector we turned into. And we were kind of meeting them head on.
Their blips merge on the radar scope. Nothing.
They were either above us or below us, I don't know. But we never did see them.
Simmons is concerned that the MiGs got past him. If so, the F-105 strike force is now in serious jeopardy. He quickly reverses course and powers back toward the fighter bombers.
The role of the American fighter pilots largely was offensive-defensive. It was not to go knock down a MiG. It was like shepherds to protect the strike force and dissuade the MiGs from becoming involved.
The F-4s never spot the MiG-21s. But their diversion has opened the door for a marauding MiG-17.
I told D 11 o'clock low, and he looks and says, "Those are thuds." At which time I say, "D, the last one's not, he's shooting." And he says, "Oh yeah, tally ho."
Simmons is here at 5,000 feet. A single MiG-17 is here, 2,000 feet below Simmons, attacking the thuds. Simmons has only seconds to take the MiG out, or a bomber will be lost. He'll perform a high-G diving turn to position himself behind the MiG. The captain yanks the stick in tight, slams the throttles to full burner, and boots left rudder. His Phantom dives into a 135-degree slicing turn. He quickly accelerates past Mach 1.
You're determined. You're either going to get him or you're going to ram him. I think that's kind of the attitude that I took. Just aggressive feel comes all over you. You're going to attack with everything you've got.
His number one mission in life is to get that MiG off of the tail of that 105.
Simmons levels out about 1.5 miles behind the MiG. At this range, Simmons' best option would be a heat-seeking Sidewinder missile. But with a flight of thuds in front of the MiG, it's too risky to push the button. His missile doesn't know the difference between a friendly heat source and a foe's.
So I decided right then to use the gun. Fired just a little bit out of range and put some tracers across there to break him off.
The MiG spots the tracers and brakes hard left.
It seemed to me that the MiG stopped his nose on one molecule of air and just it turned right around.
At this point, Simmons has two options.
A less experienced pilot could have tried to match that MiG's turn in the same plane, which was not possible with the F-4, meaning he would have overshot. The MiG could then have turned back into us and shot us. Or the highly skilled fighter pilot could recognize that he still has an offensive opportunity, which he did.
You cannot turn with him. Well, you have to get into another plane.
Simmons takes the fight into the vertical, performing a high-speed yo-yo. In a yo-yo, Simmons pulls into a steep climb, reverses, then dives on the MiG, cutting inside his enemy's turn. It's a maneuver that takes advantage of the Phantom's raw power.
I just pulled straight up then, going into the vertical.
Climbed about 12,000 feet. Airspeed decreased around 200, 220 knots. Pretty low for an F-4. At which time he stomps the rudder to get the nose pointed back down, unloads the G off the airplane to allow the airspeed to build back above the Mach, and then pulls toward the MiG.
The North Vietnamese pilot loses sight of Simmons.
I don't think he even saw us. Because when I went vertical, I'm sure he looked around and we were way above him.
The MiG pilot is unaware that the Angel of Death is swooping down from above.
As we start to close the range on the MiG, he realizes that we're there, and he goes into a climbing left turn, in which time he pulls the nose well out in front of him, as you have to pull lead.
As the MiG turns, he rolls to reveal the full outline of his aircraft, a perfect target. Simmons pulls the trigger. A 3-second burst. Nearly 60 pounds of high explosive incendiary ammunition devastate the rear half of the MiG-17.
Then I was able to look down and see the pieces coming off the airplane, the smoke coming out of the airplane.
Pieces came off of him. I just pulled off, pulled up beside him. He looked at me going down. He stayed with the airplane. And then he ejected just before he hit the trees. And his chute streamer, he disappeared into the trees.
Simmons and McKinney have killed their first MiG. More importantly, the F-105 strike force hits its target objective and returns home safely. The mission is a complete success. Simmons and McKinney link up with the rest of Sapphire Flight and head back toward the Gulf of Tonkin. But mere seconds into their egress, backseater McKinney spots a silver flash.
And just looking around, I looked down there and couldn't believe my eyes. There is another MiG-17 right down there on the treetops, headed back to the west.
No Phantom crew has ever scored 2 gun kills in a single engagement. Simmons and McKinney saddle up to make history. November 6th, 1967. Darrell Simmons and George McKinney have a visual on a MiG-17. The enemy jet is hugging the jungle floor, blending in with ground reflections. Firing a heat-seeking missile would be futile, but Simmons is armed with a cannon. Simmons is here at 3,000 feet. The MiG-17 is here. Once again, Simmons will use his diving speed to close the gap.
We just lit the burners, unloaded, and like I say, I wanted to put the airplane right in on him.
Simmons rolls into a hard left turn. He levels his wings barely 200 feet off the deck and just 1 mile behind the enemy aircraft. At nearly the speed of sound, his Phantom can cover that distance in a fraction of a second. The MiG hugs the ground, rocketing toward a low hill in the distance.
I thought that MiG's tactic was going to be, well, I can turn faster than F-4 comes, so I'm going to fly at this little hill, and at the last minute I'm going to turn, I'm just going to let him run into the hill.
Simmons has a 200-mile-per-hour overtake speed. He's low to the ground and too close for missiles. Once again, he'll have to depend on his gun to make the kill.
He's closing on this guy with what we call the speed of heat. I could actually look around the front seat and see a red star on each of the MiG's wings. I mean, so we're pretty doggone close, and it was time to shoot.
I was ready, and I pulled in there as quickly as I could and fired.
Simmons' cockpit recorder captures the excitement.
Okay, Dan, ready for fighting, man. Okay, good luck.
I am convinced that the first high explosive round went through the MiG's fuel tank, because at that point he turns into this great black orange explosion in the sky. It was that quick.
The Phantom is so close to the explosion that Simmons has no choice but to barrel through the churning fireball. Smoke is sucked into the jet's intakes. The Phantom shudders, its engines gasping for breath.
We were very, very happy for about 3 seconds until we went through that fireball. And since there's no oxygen there and disturbed airflow, it causes the compressor blades in our jet to stall, which kind of goes boom.
Right then, we just thought we had a one-way ticket to the Hanoi Hilton, because we were deep in there. We weren't that far out of Hanoi.
Their fear is short-lived. The Phantom's compressor blades kick in, and its twin J-79 engines return to full power. Simmons decides it's time to get out of Dodge. Captains Simmons and McKinney make it safely back to base at Ubon, Thailand, having scored the only double-gun kill by a Phantom crew in the entire war.
Hey, how'd you do? 2, baby. Beautiful.
Throughout the course of the Vietnam War, over 24 MiGs met their demise as a result of 20mm air-to-air cannon fire. In many of those instances, if the American pilot had not had a gun at his disposal, the MiG would have survived to fight another day.
It's definitely, as proven through all the wars, the most effective air-to-air weapon is that gun that you can point at the enemy, and if you point it correctly and pull the right lead, it's extremely lethal.
Improved reliability and guidance systems have cemented the missile as the primary weapon of modern air superiority fighters, like the F-15 Eagle and the F-22 Raptor. But the lessons of Vietnam have not been lost. Even these advanced fighters are equipped with internal cannons.
In most cases, the cannon was kept, because on certain close-in combat situations, nothing like a cannon, because you can fire it very close in, you can fire it instantaneously, and it won't be decoyed by electronic warfare or any tactics. The bullet will still hit the target.
Technology, no matter how advanced, is prone to fail. When it does, the score will be settled up close and personal with guns.
Hãy subscribe cho kênh Ghiền Mì Gõ để không bỏ lỡ
skies above North Vietnam erupt into the fiercest air combat of the war. Brutal supersonic dogfights. As kills mount, one U.S. pilot pursues a life-or-death quest for a coveted title. The first Air Force fighter ace of the Vietnam War. Using state-of-the-art computer animation, you're in the cockpit with America's finest pilots as F-4 Phantoms challenge communist MiG-21s. Experience the battle. Dissect the tactics. Relive the dogfights. April 16, 1972. American combat forces have been committed to the fight in Vietnam for 8 years. Today, 4 U.S. Air Force F-4 Phantoms, call sign Basco, orbit 18,000 feet above Laos. The Phantoms are waiting to escort B-52 bombers into the heart of North Vietnam in a dramatic escalation of the air war. But there's been a mix-up. The B-52s are still on the ground, and the Phantoms are burning fuel at a rate of 150 pounds per minute. To reduce drag, Flight Leader Fred Olmsted orders the Phantoms to jettison their empty centerline fuel tanks. Still, the reduced weight won't buy enough time.
Phantom pilots know that there is nothing that you can do in a Phantom to save that big, beautiful aircraft and burn all the fuel you got. We had to make a decision.
Olmsted has 2 choices. Wait for the B-52s and risk running out of fuel, or use their fuel for the flight's secondary mission, hunting for North Vietnamese MiGs. Olmsted chooses the MiGs, the Blue Bandits. He turns the Phantoms 180 degrees. Basco flight is now on the prowl. Flying number 3 is Olmsted's good friend, Dan Cherry.
Fred makes a turn and heads right for Hanoi. And we start pushing the power up and picking up the speed. And we cross that border into North Vietnam.
Almost exactly at that precise time that we ingressed into North Vietnam from our orbit in Laos, my backseater picked up 2 Blue Bandits.
Basco flight's audio transmissions were recorded, a remarkable historical record of air-to-air combat in Southeast Asia.
Basco has 2 bandits on the nose, F-20. Copy that. The bandits on the nose at 20. Let's get rid of them, Basco.
2 silver MiG-21s are 20 miles out and closing head-on at the Phantoms. Olmsted isn't backing off. He orders Basco flight to stay on course.
They marched right down the radar scope from 18 miles to 12 miles to 10 miles to 8 miles.
I didn't see them at the time, and Fred said, "There's 2 silver MiG-21s there, Dan." And I said something really clever and smart like, "Where?"
The MiG-21 there, Dan. Dan.
Oh, joy.
2 Blue Bandits just went by us. And that's when the fight really started.
Olmsted and his wingman give chase. He rolls his F-4 Phantom into a climbing turn and swings around 180 degrees. Olmsted and his wingman are maneuvering to get above and behind the Bandit into a firing envelope. Cherry and his wingman stay in trail, protecting Olmsted's 6 o'clock. Then, Cherry spots a 3rd Bandit, a camouflaged MiG-21, ambushing Fred Olmsted from behind.
We've gone through about 90 degrees of turn when my wingman, Greg Crane, spots the camouflage MiG right off of our nose.
The North Vietnamese have set a trap, and flight leader Fred Olmsted is the target. The stage is set for a legendary dogfight. A battle on the cutting edge of a dramatic turnaround in the Vietnam Air War. Americans are in the skies above North Vietnam for the first time in 3.5 years. In October 1968, seeking to de-escalate the conflict and bring the North Vietnamese to the conference table, then-President Lyndon Johnson declared bombing off-limits above the DMZ, separating North and South Vietnam. The North used the bombing halt to build up its military capability. By 1972, they're ready for a major offensive. They stream hundreds of thousands of troops and armor down the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
They had massed approximately 200,000 troops there north of the DMZ. That's 20 divisions, 600 tanks, and to put that in perspective, that's the same size, roughly, as the German army had during the Battle of the Bulge.
In March, the North Vietnamese surged south across the DMZ. The fate of South Vietnam rests in the hands of American airmen. April 9th, 1972. For the first time in the Vietnam conflict, American B-52 bombers cross the DMZ into the north. They pound supply lines and troop concentrations, feeding the communists' advance. The gloves are coming off. In addition to dropping bombs, F-4 pilots have another mission: protect lumbering B-52s from enemy MiGs.
I do remember the warning that was issued by the Chief of Staff, and he said something to the effect that if any of you hotshot F-4 drivers let a B-52 get shot down by a MiG, you won't even be able to drive a taxi cab anyplace.
To American airmen, the most dangerous aerial threat is the MiG-21. First introduced in 1956, the MiG-21, like its MiG-15 and MiG-17 predecessors, is renowned for its speed and agility. But unlike its swept-wing predecessors, the MiG-21 employed a triangular delta wing, an attractive design for a supersonic fighter, combining low drag and structural weight with excellent supersonic maneuverability.
It was a Formula One racer, if you want to think of it that way. Turned extremely sharp. It had a big afterburner, strong, a big thrusting afterburner engine. It could turn very, very quickly, very well. It was hard to see. No real smoke, no smoking engines.
The MiG-21 is armed with 2 heat-seeking air-to-air missiles and 2 23mm cannons. It's lethal in close encounters. In contrast to the sleek MiG, the massive 2-seat F-4 Phantom was designed for the Navy in the late 1950s as a long-range fleet defense fighter. In 1962, it was adapted for the Air Force for both air-to-air and air-to-ground missions. The Phantom was armed with 4 long-range radar-guided AIM-7 Sparrow missiles and up to 4 short-range heat-seeking AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles. It could also carry up to 16,000 pounds of bombs, rockets, and napalm. 2 afterburning J-79 turbojet engines make the F-4 a fast and versatile heavy hitter.
You'll never, ever, ever forget what it was like to start those big old J-79 engines up and add just a little bit of power and feel that big old Phantom taxiing out and shaking and rumbling. You just knew you had strapped on a very, very masculine piece of equipment. It was massive. It looked like a combat plane.
Capable of reaching speeds over 1,400 miles per hour, the F-4 is 100 miles per hour faster than the MiG. But the lightweight MiG, with its tight turn radius at high altitude, has the advantage in horizontal maneuvering, while the F-4's power has the advantage in vertical maneuvers. With American Phantoms and B-52s on the attack, North Vietnamese pilots respond aggressively. They abandoned their traditional hit-and-run attacks. Now they turn to challenge the Americans. There's going to be blood in the sky. Fred Olmsted and his wingman are in the middle of it. they've fallen for a trap and chased after two silver MiG-21s. A third camouflaged MiG-21 has jumped on their tail. MiGs sometimes used camouflage paint schemes for this kind of mission.
Staying low with camouflage made it virtually impossible to see him when we're looking down in the jungle.
The silver MiG-21s are here. Olmsted and his wingman are here. The camouflaged MiG streaks in on their tail here, but he doesn't see Dan Cherry right behind him on his 6 o'clock. Cherry and his wingman streak forward and engage the MiG.
I rolled out, saw him, and just headed right for him. And he broke left and went right into a cloud bank.
140 in the cloud, Ben. On our nose, Ben. Reverse back to left. Okay, went in the cloud.
Going into a cloud in North Vietnam is a scary proposition. I'm thinking, man, I don't want to go in that cloud, but I was not going to lose this opportunity either.
For American airmen in the hostile skies of Southeast Asia, an innocent-looking cloud can be a death trap. Vietnamese radar operators can track the F-4s through the clouds to launch surface-to-air missiles against them. The F-4s can electronically detect a SAM launch, but can't visually avoid the missile. There's also the danger of mid-air collision. Cherry and his wingman know the risks involved. The American airmen are enveloped in a gray, foreboding mist, but the F-4s press the attack. April 16, 1972. American airmen are in the skies of North Vietnam for the first time in 4 years. Dan Cherry and his wingman Baby Beef Crane have chased a MiG into the clouds. Visibility is zero, a fighter pilot's worst enemy. The pressure is much too intense. Cherry aborts.
I couldn't stand it any longer, and I said, I'm not staying in this cloud any longer, MiG or no MiG. So I'd look all around, and my wingman confirmed his position. So the feeling then was, we've lost this guy.
Suddenly, Baby Beef calls out. MiG, 2 o'clock, 4,000 feet above, climbing right turn. It's a lucky break. The MiG bursts through the cloud bank right in front of him.
We're right behind him now. We're right behind him. We're right behind him.
Cherry peers skyward. The MiG has lost speed in his climb. He's directly in Cherry's killing zone. Cherry pitches his nose up, trying to gain a missile mark. His first MiG kill is right in front of him.
Things seemed to slow down in their motion to where everything became really clear.
Cherry gets good tone. The infrared seeker head of the AIM-9 Sidewinder growls in the pilot's headset when it gets a lock on. Cherry strains to see the missile track. Nothing. He quickly launches a second Sidewinder. Again, no missile track. The missiles have launched, but Cherry doesn't know it. The MiG's high G turn has defeated the missile's seeker head.
I'm really angry. I mean, here's my whole life. I've never seen a MiG this close before. And I have this opportunity to get this guy, and I've got an airplane that's not going to work.
Desperate, the MiG noses over into a spiraling dive. He's hoping that his tight turns will prevent Cherry from getting another lock-on. Cherry and his wingman kick over into a diving chase. From 25,000 feet, the three planes hurtle toward the ground. The Americans have the weight and thrust advantage. Baby Beef has nosed ahead in the dive. Cherry clears him to take the lead, rolling to the outside, making way for his wingman. Beef can't use a heat-seeking Sidewinder. The MiG's turning too tight. He knows it can't lock in a high G turn. He fires a radar-guided Sparrow. Something's wrong. It drops like lead.
Then he fires another one, and it does ignite, but it goes into a huge corkscrew out to the right. Then the third missile he fired, and it was tracking really well. And I thought, man, this is really looking good.
Beef's third missile streaks through the sky. Another radar-guided Sparrow. The Sparrow tracks steadily on the descending MiG. The MiG brakes hard right. The 500-pound missile should follow, but it darts past without detonating. Cherry and Beef have fired 5 missiles. All have failed. It's a problem that's plagued the Air Force since the beginning of the war. Developed in the mid-1950s, the heat-seeking AIM-9 Sidewinder relies on infrared homing. First-generation Sidewinders are plagued with problems. They're prone to interference by clouds and rain, and often lock onto bogus heat sources, like the sun. With an effective range of 2 miles, the Sidewinder is best employed against short-range targets. Its long-range counterpart is the AIM-7 Sparrow, whose maximum range of 28 miles is far greater than the Sidewinder. Introduced in the late 1950s, the Sparrow uses radar instead of infrared. It must be actively tracked to the target by the F-4's backseater, the Weapons System Officer, or WISO. But the Sparrow is virtually useless against fast-maneuvering targets inside a 5,000-foot radius.
During the war, there were over 200 occasions where someone fired a Sparrow missile. It never came off the airplane. Of the ones that did come off the airplane, the kill rate was 0.11. In other words, 11 out of 100 were victorious.
The Phantom Air crews have another problem. Air Force fighter pilots, as opposed to their Navy counterparts, received little or no training on how to maneuver against small, fast adversaries like the MiG.
What did I learn in my training about MiG pilots? It's a very simple answer. I learned virtually nothing. The experience we received in training was not against any dissimilar type aircraft. We only saw other fellow Phantoms with the same flying characteristics that we had.
The most effective air-to-air training we had was done illegally. And we would go out and fly our bombing mission or our radar low-level navigation mission and save some fuel at the end and then fight with each other. So whatever skills we had when we went in there were developed by hook or crook.
Thrust into his first dogfight against an actual MiG-21, Dan Cherry is on a steep learning curve. He races through his options. 2 of his missiles have failed. But he's determined to kill the MiG.
This is going to sound weird, but I'm thinking I'm going to ram this guy. That's the aggressive feeling that I had at the time, was that I was not going to let this guy get away.
The MiG has lost airspeed in the turn. Cherry and Beef pitch up and roll vertical to keep from overshooting. As they descend once again on the MiG, Cherry calls for the lead.
I got him right. Okay, he's breaking left. He's left, Beef. I got him. Fast forward, break left. Okay. Look at him, Dan.
I kept telling Greg to get out of the way, and I'm in burner, and I'm trying to close on him because I'm ready to shoot. I'm ready to try to shoot.
Cherry slides past Crane and fires a missile.
Lo and behold, that big AIM-7 Sparrow comes out of there, and it does one of these kind of like a barrel roll maneuver like this at first.
The Sparrow appears to be tracking off course, but then, to Cherry's relief, it rides the Phantom's invisible radar beam to the target. Its 65-pound warhead detonates, ripping the right wing from the airplane. Cherry watches the plane plummet in a fireball. From the flames, the MiG pilot miraculously appears underneath his parachute. Cherry roars past his vanquished opponent.
I made a little jink with the airplane to miss the MiG pilot and his parachute. We went up by him, well within 500 feet of him. And I remember clearly his legs sticking out straight like this, and the black flying suit he was wearing, the black flying suit on.
Dan Cherry has killed his first MiG.
I got to understand, you got a kill on
But the fight isn't over. 10 miles away, Cherry's good friend Fred Olmsted is chasing down 2 enemy MiG-21s. He's in for the fight of his life.
So right then, there's no doubt we're going to have an engagement. We're going to have a very serious dogfight, and somebody's not coming home.
April 16, 1972. F-4 Phantoms are dueling communist MiGs in the most intense dogfights of the air war. Fred Olmsted is on the tail of 2 MiG-21s. The enemies streamline their fighters for battle.
I then remember distinctly seeing silver objects coming down in front of me, and they pickled their centerline tanks.
Then, unexpectedly, the lead MiG rolls inverted, diving earthward.
And he was gone. He was out of the fight. That meant it was my airplane and my wingman against their wingman.
Olmsted and his wingman are here. The MiG leader has just bugged out, leaving his wingman to fend for himself. Olmsted bores in for the kill. The lone MiG jinks down and into a left turn. A classic MiG ploy. He wants to lure Olmsted into a horizontal fight where the more maneuverable MiG can outturn the Phantom.
Once I saw that turn, I was confronted with a choice here, whether or not to try and turn with him and get the gun sight on him, or try and accomplish what I had learned in the past. And I said, I'm going to fight this guy in the vertical. I'm not going to get out there and try and turn with this man.
Olmsted pitches vertically, then rolls over into a dive. The move allows him to stay behind the MiG while keeping his airspeed up. He'll avoid a turning fight where his heavy Phantom will dissipate crucial airspeed or energy at a far greater rate than the lightweight MiG. It's an effective maneuver called lagging.
I found that I could accelerate coming down because gravity was working for me, pull inside and use my increased energy to close the distance that way.
Olmsted and his wingman repeat the maneuver several times. The horizon tumbles as the planes jockey for position. Losing sight of his attacker, the MiG reverses his turn to reacquire visual contact. But the reversal slows him down and allows Olmsted to close within missile range. Olmsted's radar-guided AIM-7 Sparrow gains lock. Olmsted fires. The missile streaks toward the MiG at twice the speed of sound and plows through the MiG's right wing. Incredibly, the MiG keeps flying.
I don't know whether the missile only partially detonated or perhaps it was just the impact that absolutely sawed that wing off, but that's what I had. I had a MiG with about a half of a right wing and a spiraling left-hand turn at that time.
Olmsted presses the attack. He fires a second missile. It doesn't track. Sparrow 3 armed. missile away.
It hit him right in the top of the canopy, right through the canopy, and then I got a pure, absolute explosion because the airplane just exploded. It looked like two miniature nuclear fireballs, actually, and it just spiraled right down in front of us.
Red ground Basco 01, Basco, scratch number 821.
Fred Olmsted has kill number 2 for Basco flight. What began as an aborted B-52 escort mission has resulted in 2 confirmed MiG kills. In 1972, the North Vietnamese have less than 60 MiGs in their Air Force. Thanks to Fred Olmsted and Dan Cherry, they've lost 3% of their fighters. On the ground, the determined North Vietnamese continue their offensive. In May 1972, the bombing campaign intensifies dramatically. B-52 sorties are doubled, from 1,500 in March to over 3,000 in May. F-4s are employed for bombing strikes and strafing runs against North Vietnamese infrastructure and troop positions. The massive new aerial offensive is called Operation Linebacker.
There were much greater numbers of aircraft involved. It was a massive campaign that probably did more damage in 2 weeks than the rest of the damage done in the entire war in North Vietnam.
The strategic objective is to both blunt the North Vietnamese advance and to bring them back to the negotiating table in Paris. There's a renewed sense of purpose among the American airmen, including Captain Steve Ritchie. After graduating number 1 in his flight training class, Ritchie served his first tour in Southeast Asia in 1968. He then returned to the States, where he became one of the youngest flight instructors in Air Force history. In 1972, he returns to Vietnam.
I don't think any of us felt like we could sit here and live this good life here in America while our friends and our colleagues were back in Vietnam.
Steve Ritchie racks up his first 2 MiG kills in the opening weeks of Operation Linebacker, one on May 10th, another on May 31st. Ritchie is proving himself a skilled dogfighter. As Linebacker rolls on through June, Ritchie flies in support of dozens of strike missions. July 8, 1972. On routine combat air patrol, Ritchie will tangle with a flight of lethal MiG-21s and plunge into one of the most astounding dogfights of the Vietnam War. July 8, 1972. Pilot Steve Ritchie leads a flight of 4 F-4 Phantoms, call sign Paula, on combat air patrol over North Vietnam. As part of Operation Linebacker, the war's biggest bombing campaign, their mission is to protect B-52s from MiGs. On this mission, the Americans are able to tap into the enemy's command and control network, an intelligence coup that's driving the success of Linebacker.
They could hear the controller that was talking to the pilot. They could hear what the pilot was saying. And so you knew where they were, what they're looking at, and where they're coming from.
Steve Ritchie and Paula Flight are heading towards Hanoi. Suddenly, combat control crackles in his helmet. MiGs are in the air, somewhere below. Ritchie drops down to search for the enemy. He can't find them. They could be anywhere. Then another warning comes over the radio.
I got a call indicating that they had us in sight and they were cleared to fire. And that information at best was about 40 to 60 seconds old. And we had no visual. So that gets your attention.
If he stays straight and level, he's a sitting duck. Ritchie takes evasive action by making a hard right turn. The radio calls out another warning. This one is ominous. 2 MiGs, 2 miles to the north. The MiGs are on Ritchie's 6, the killing zone, but he still can't see them. Ritchie's best choice is to turn directly into his attacker and try to get a visual. He banks left, stays in the turn, and swings 180 degrees head-on against the unseen enemy. His head swivels in the cockpit, scanning the sky. Visible for a fraction of a second, a MiG-21 flashes by at 600 miles per hour.
We passed canopy to canopy about 1,000 feet from each other, doing about 600 miles an hour each, closing at about 1,200 miles an hour. Just subsonic. I could actually see the pilot in the cockpit.
The pilots of the North Vietnamese Air Force were trained by the Russians and Chinese. Their skill level varied widely. Throughout the war, it was strongly suspected that volunteers from North Korea, China, and the Soviet Union were in the cockpits of some communist planes. Ritchie knows there's another MiG in the air. They've split up, setting a trap for him. The first MiG has streaked past Ritchie. If he turns to follow, the second MiG will be on his 6, but Ritchie doesn't bite. He drops altitude and waits for the second MiG to show his hand. And he does. Now Ritchie makes his move. He pulls into a hard left turn. 6.5 Gs plaster him into his seat. He strains to keep an eye on the second MiG. The MiG banks right, an unorthodox move.
I was very surprised about halfway through this turn, after losing sight during the turn, to see the number 2 MiG in a right turn level and high. Most of us who fly fighter airplanes prefer to turn left and right. We prefer a left traffic pattern to a right traffic pattern. It's more comfortable to do this than it is this.
The two planes are now angling towards each other in what pilots refer to as the high crossing position. In order for his missile to get a lock, Ritchie needs to get behind the MiG. He rolls to the inside, causing the MiG to shoot past him. Ritchie's now on the MiG's tail. It's a brilliant move. Ritchie pulls hard right out of the roll and gets a radar lock. It then takes 4 seconds for the radar to feed the information to the missile.
1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, which is a long time. Squeeze the trigger. Nothing happens. It's another 1.5 seconds until the missile comes off the rail.
Ritchie commits a second missile. Pilots often ripple-fired the Sparrow because of its failure rate.
First missile went through the center of the fuselage of the MiG. Second missile went through the fireball.
The explosion sends a wall of debris hurtling through the air. Ritchie's headed right for it. He rolls up to steer clear. It's too late. Debris punches into his left wing, gouging the skin. Ritchie clutches the stick. The big Phantom shrugs off the insult. Ritchie firewalls the throttle. The fight's still on. His number 4, Tommy Fiesel, is in trouble. He's got a MiG on his 6 o'clock. Ritchie is here. Tommy Fiesel is here. He's in a tight circling turn with a MiG-21 on his tail. The MiG's tight turning radius will eventually put him in a position to shoot down Paula 4. Ritchie sizes up the situation. He's going fast. If he engages too soon, he'll overshoot. The best time to get on the MiG's tail is when it's moving away from him, and he can match its turn. Ritchie's number 4 and the MiG-21 pass in front. It's time. Ritchie pounces. The MiG-21 is now predator and prey. The MiG pilot sees Ritchie. He aborts the chase, brakes hard and down.
Put the MiG in the gun sight, auto lock with the trigger on the left throttle, immediate lock on, 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. Squeeze the trigger.
The 12-foot-long Sparrow blazes off the Phantom. At 1,200 miles an hour, the Sparrow rocks to the right, and then, like a spear, it buries itself deep in the MiG's belly. In a stellar display of airmanship, Steve Ritchie downs 2 MiG-21s in just 1 minute and 29 seconds.
Everything that I'd studied, learned, experienced, worked for 30 years, all came together and gelled in an instant in time. So it was by far the most perfect mission that I was ever involved in.
Paula Flight rejoins and heads for home, Udon, Thailand. When they arrive, the celebration begins.
I actually flew a couple of victory rolls over the field, which is kind of traditional. And we had a party at the club that night you would have enjoyed.
Steve Ritchie is on the cusp of greatness. He has tied renowned veteran pilot Robin Olds with 4 MiGs to his credit. Ritchie needs just one more kill to join the coveted ranks of American fighter aces. But the quest could cost him his life. Steve Ritchie's double MiG kill on July 8, 1972 is hailed as one of the war's great dogfights. Now he needs just one more victory to become the Air Force's first and only ace pilot of the Vietnam War.
There was a whole lot of attention because the Navy had an ace, Air Force didn't have an ace. There was a lot of pressure.
August 28, 1972. Steve Ritchie leads a flight of 4 F-4 Phantoms, call sign Buick. Their combat air patrol mission is winding down when he gets word of MiGs in the air.
I was northwest of Hanoi, beginning to get low on fuel. Turns out MiGs were southwest of Hanoi and were being vectored back to Hanoi.
As flight lead, Ritchie's Phantom is equipped with a little black box that makes a big difference in air-to-air combat against MiGs. The APX-81, officially known as the Combat Tree, or just Tree to airmen. Tree is an IFF, Identification Friend or Foe transponder system. All military aircraft carry transponders that send and receive identification information to air traffic control and friendly planes. But Tree is unique. It can read the enemy's transponder. Tree-equipped Phantoms can tell if a blip on their radar is a MiG and shoot them out of the sky from miles away.
We got the Tree contact way out. 2 MiG-21s coming back, non-maneuvering. They're about 5,000, maybe 8,000 feet above us. Started this climbing turn into the direction of them on the radar.
Ritchie has used technology to get in position, but he must get a visual before he can fire.
Under those circumstances, the cardinal rule is to never fire if there's any chance there could be a friendly in the forward firing sector.
The aircraft hurtle in, their closing speed a blistering 1,500 miles per hour. Ritchie fires 2 missiles, but at these staggering closing speeds, the missile can't maintain radar lock. They streak away harmlessly. The MiGs take no evasive action. They're focused on reaching the sanctuary of Hanoi's anti-aircraft defenses. Ritchie must make his kill soon. The MiGs roar head-on past the climbing F-4s. Ritchie orders a left brake. They swing around 180 degrees and zero in on the MiG's tail.
I'm now supersonic, doing about 1.2 Mach. They're still subsonic. And I got a radar lock on, fired 2 missiles. The first one appeared to go by on the right side of the MiG, and he broke left, which solved the problem for the 4th missile.
The MiG's abrupt maneuver slows him down. He drifts into the Sparrow missile's effective range. The missile's warhead detonates on impact. Steve Ritchie becomes the first and only Air Force ace of the Vietnam War.
The number 2 MiG in that flight of 2 did a wave down to the ground, and I elected not to try to go after that MiG due to fuel. And, you know, I've debated that in my mind many, many times over the years, whether or not we should have tried that.
Ritchie and Buick flight head south for friendly airspace as word reaches the airbase at Udorn, Thailand. The Air Force now has an ace.
We came in and actually did a little air show over the field.
In this rarely seen interview, Steve Ritchie recounts the mission.
Picked them up high at 11 o'clock on almost a head-on pad, and from there maneuvered into 6 o'clock and fired a few missiles and was lucky enough to get a kill.
Operation Linebacker thunders on. The Paris peace talks resume in late August. The devastating air assault has taken a heavy toll on North Vietnamese transportation, oil supplies, and power generation.
The North Vietnamese simply did not think we had the will, or our president had the will, to bring the force of our attack air down upon them. Miscalculated.
On October 22nd, North Vietnamese concessions in Paris lead to a cessation of bombing strikes over the 20th parallel, but the talks break down again 2 months later. On December 14th, President Nixon sends Hanoi an ultimatum. Come back to the negotiating table within 72 hours, or the bombing resumes. There's no response from Hanoi. On December 18th, Operation Linebacker 2 commences, and B-52s head north. 200 B-52s, half the Strategic Air Command, are committed to the fight. By December 29th, the big bombers have flown 729 sorties and dropped over 15,000 tons of bombs. The North Vietnamese return to the negotiations, and on January 23, 1973, a peace agreement is signed. Thanks in part to Phantom pilots, the war in Vietnam had finally ended. American airmen downed 193 MiGs in air-to-air combat against a loss of 89 of their own.
Those of us out on the point of the spear, so to speak, very much rely on each other to get this job done and to survive. So we develop a very, very unusual bond with each other.
We had a mission. We worked the details of the plan ahead of time, and we executed it to perfection. And then to have the added bonus of a couple of MiG kills as well is pretty neat experience.
Being a MiG killer is a life-shaping event, I would say. You feel honored to be part of a very, very elite group of fighter pilots, going back to World War I, World War II, Korea, you name it. And the men that can claim to have won aerial victories and dogfights, an illustrious group. So it is an honor and a privilege to be part of that group.
on Yankee Station. Pilots of the USS Midway launch into the skies of Southeast Asia. Over Vietnam, they face a fiery crucible of unrelenting combat. The men of this remarkable carrier will make history, scoring the first and last MiG kill of the war. Now, using state-of-the-art computer animation, you're in the cockpit as pilots of the Midway go head-to-head against skilled and determined foes. Experience the battle. Dissect the tactics. Relive the dogfights with the MiG killers of Midway. June 17, 1965. The early days of the Vietnam War. Strike aircraft launched from the deck of the USS Midway on Yankee Station, 100 miles from the North Vietnamese coast. The aircraft assemble over the Gulf and push into North Vietnam. They'll hit the Tan Hoa Railroad Bridge, a strike meant to slow the movement of supplies to the south. Among them are two F-4 Phantoms led by Commander Lou Page with his radar intercept officer, or RIO, Lieutenant J.C. Smith, in the back seat.
Our mission as the F-4 fighters was a tar cap. We were a target cap in front of the target to the north.
The Target Combat Air Patrol stays close to the target to intercept hostile enemy aircraft. Page and Smith's wingman is Lieutenant Dave Batson with his RIO, Lieutenant Commander Rob DeRemus. These aviators from the USS Midway have a date with destiny. On this mission, they will score the first MiG kills of the Vietnam War.
The attack boys had done their thing. They had just called feet wet, and I said, let's make one more orbit. And we were about 12,000 feet, maybe 13,000 feet. And we turned the orbit, and just as we sweep about 360 with the nose of the airplane, two targets pop up. That's good. Now, was it Navy? I don't think so. We didn't have that many Navy out there. Was it Air Force? Oh, I don't know, but I'm hoping. We got to look at it.
This early in the war, there is no way to ID the contacts electronically. They'll have to get a visual. The bogies are at 11 o'clock, 2,000 feet up, range 32 miles. Page and Smith begin the shadow boxing by making a slight turn to the right, coaxing the bogies to turn towards them. The Americans curve away, but the bogies don't bite. The Phantoms roll back to the left, taking a more aggressive tack.
What do I want to happen? I want those MiGs to turn into me. Fingernail trick. Right now you can't see if my fingernails are dirty. If he turns into me, you can see if my fingernails are dirty.
Smith orders Batson and DeRemus into a trail position.
They whoop, drop back. Didn't say how far. He knew. He should be 1.5 miles to 2 miles behind us in trail.
In the front, Page and Smith will gain positive visual ID on the bogies. Batson and DeRemus will target the lead contact on radar and fire as soon as it is confirmed hostile. Page and Smith will target the second bogie.
Going in, then I go to ICS, intercom, I said, Lou, it should be right on your nose. Right on your nose, just slightly above. I didn't want to put him on the nose and put him under it. All of a sudden, he said, tally-ho, 4. That's the first I knew there were 4. He said, MiGs, MiGs, because the old boy turned like this into us. Round wingtips, dirty fingernails.
The contacts are confirmed hostile. 4 MiG-17s in 2 elements. They're already locked up and in range for the Phantom Sparrow missiles.
I said, shoot, shoot, shoot. You never say fire in an airplane. I heard just, whoo, I felt the missile leave the airplane.
Page and Smith's missile slams into the MiG-17. Debris from the explosion takes down the MiG's wingman.
I heard, boola boola. That means a hit. And at the same time I looked out, here goes the Sparrow missile across my starboard wing from old Batman that was in the back.
Batson's missile strikes the second MiG element. Again, debris knocks out the wingman. The Phantom pilots have struck an historic blow. The war's first kills of North Vietnamese MiGs. They will later get official credit for 2 kills, with 1 damaged. The victory was achieved by the men of a remarkable carrier, the USS Midway. Its proud history began in the months following World War II.
During World War II, the aircraft carrier came to prominence amongst navies because its offensive reach was so much greater and more powerful than any other type of platform, including the battleship.
When launched in September 1945, Midway was the epitome of a World War II carrier. But the race of technology would demand vast changes.
Jet aviation posed a severe challenge to carrier aviation as it was at the end of World War II. Jet aircraft are heavier, they require more power to launch, they require more space to recover because of faster landing speeds.
In 1955, Midway was rebuilt with several jet-age innovations. A steam catapult to launch heavier aircraft, mirrored landing lights, and an angled deck. But it wasn't until March of 1965 in the Vietnam War that the Midway first saw combat. The cruise only lasted 9 months, but it became clear Midway again needed upgrades to accommodate the rigors of an air war over Indochina. She was decommissioned in February 1966 and spent the next 4 years undergoing the most extensive modernization effort the Navy had attempted up to that time.
After a 4-year rebuild on the Midway, the Navy got a brand new carrier out of the deal. She went from a 2.8 acre flight deck to nearly 4 acres in flight deck. She could handle any of the aircraft that were currently on the Navy's drawing boards and was able to operate for extended periods of time and function every bit as efficiently as her large deck sisters.
Midway is again ready to do battle over North Vietnam. May 18th, 1972, Yankee Station. A strike is launched from the deck of Midway. The aircraft assemble over the Gulf and push into the north. They'll target North Vietnamese infrastructure in the Haiphong area, part of an intense air campaign to stem the recent invasion of South Vietnam. Flying as part of the mission's combat air patrol are two F-4 Phantoms, led by Lieutenant Henry Bart Bartholomew with his Rio, Lieutenant Orrin Brown.
I got put on the mission that afternoon as a spare aircraft. The lead aircraft had hydraulic problems on the catapult, so it had to be taxied off the catapult. We were launched consequently.
Bartholomew's wingman is Lieutenant Pat Arwood, with his backseater, Lieutenant Mike Taco Bell.
Our mission was to position ourselves between Haiphong and Kemp Airfield to interdict any MiGs that might challenge the strike force.
Our mantra became MiGs in May for Midway. And we had that written on the blackboard in the ready room in big letters, and so we were all convinced that we were going to do it.
As the Phantoms approach Kemp Airfield, their radio crackles to life. Bandits in the area. Their pulse quickens. They begin a slow descent. Bart Bartholomew scans the sky, sure to call out any threat to his wingman, Pat Arwood.
As I looked north to clear his 6 o'clock position, I was able to see a couple of silver aircraft. And I knew that we didn't have anything that was painted that silver. So I knew they were MiGs.
The Phantoms prepare for combat. It will be a baptism of fire. In their first mission over the north, they'll get their chance to score MiGs in May for Midway. May 18, 1972. Two F-4 Phantom crews from the USS Midway are about to taste air combat over North Vietnam for the first time. Above Kemp Airfield, they've spotted two MiG-19s.
We took off after him. I wanted Pat to be about 3,000 feet above me and cover me as I went down after him.
Arwood pitches up. Bartholomew noses down and banks right. Roaring in over Kemp, Bartholomew rolls left into position behind the enemy.
They became aware of him. They both pickled off their external wing tanks. There was fuel streaming out of their wing tanks. So my thought was, seeing that they still had fuel in their wing tanks, so they probably had full internal fuel just like us.
I followed them as best I could. I didn't quite have the energy to pull inside them. In order to keep my energy up, I had to stay sort of nose slightly behind and not pulling quite as many G's as they were pulling inside my turn. Basically, your nose is pointed instead of ahead of the aircraft, it's pointed behind the aircraft, and you're sort of following him around like this in a lagging position.
As Bart was pushing the MiGs around the circle, and they were staying in the circle, I was in a high position, and I did a series of high yo-yos.
The yo-yo maneuvers will take advantage of the Phantom's raw power. Each move will improve his angle off the MiG's tail for a heat-seeking missile shot.
I did the first high yo-yo, the dive down and back up. I did another dive down and back up, and I was starting to lose position. So on the third one, I knew that I was coming to the inside of the circle. I was starting to crowd Bart. I was coming too close to him. So at that point, I decided to fire to break up the MiGs.
I felt a missile come off the airplane and saw a MiG-19 that absolutely cranked it around so hard, and the missile went right by his tailplanes.
The MiGs split up. Bartholomew follows the wingman. Arwood stays on the leader. He buries the stick in his gut, straining to keep in trail of the tight-turning MiG-19.
You pull hard and the plane is passing you. You're leaning forward in your straps. You're craning, turning very hard to the left, in this case to the left, to try to see back over your shoulder. But he had turned so far inside of me that I just lost sight of it completely.
Arwood's heart races as he searches frantically for the MiG. He pitches vertical, climbing to 4,000 feet. Still no sign of the enemy. Meanwhile, Bartholomew chases the second MiG.
I was losing enough energy, so I just knew that I had to get out and gather more energy back.
Bartholomew unloads G and quickly distances himself from the MiG. He extends to the west 2 miles before pitching back to re-enter the fight. He's gained precious airspeed, but lost sight of the bandit.
Oren still had sight, which is a great testament to the value of having 4 eyes in a cockpit. So Oren was able to talk me onto him.
The MiG is at 10 o'clock low, sweeping left in an effort to maneuver into Bartholomew's 6. Bartholomew's instincts kick in. He'll lure the enemy closer. Then, at the last possible second, he'll pop his nose up, hit his speed brakes and flaps, and force the MiG to overshoot. It's a bold maneuver that will turn the tables in an instant.
Oren's calling the MiG, and he's calling the MiG, and he's calling the MiG with position, clock code, and so forth. And I waited until the MiG got to be about 830 low, and I could see him start to pull his nose towards me.
Bartholomew yanks the stick back and performs the maneuver. The heavy Phantom pitches up as the MiG is thrown outside of his turn.
So I popped my speed brakes and my flaps for about 5 seconds. And I put them right back in, and I was about upside down like so. And as I went to the outside of the turn, now I'm slow. He popped it right out in front of me. And now we're canopy to canopy, going just about straight up.
As they rocket into the air, the MiG inches out in front of Bartholomew, but the Phantom's airspeed is plummeting. He can't keep climbing much longer.
Fortunately for me, he had the same problem, and he decided to dump his nose just a fraction of a second prior to when I did. So what happened was, at that point, he slid out slightly in front of me. I couldn't have been more than 200 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet behind him. Way too close to shoot a missile.
He's in perfect position for a gun kill. But the F-4 doesn't have a gun. He throttles back, carefully trying to separate himself for a missile shot without losing too much airspeed. To the east, Pat Arwood continues his anxious search.
I kept looking for MiGs, looking for my lead, looking for anybody that I could find. And I didn't see him. So I was really getting concerned about that.
I looked down and I see the runway at Kemp Airfield with all these bomb craters that had been patched. And I'm thinking, if we go down here, it's not going to be real friendly.
Finally, at 8 o'clock low, Arwood spots the MiG. His enemy rocks back and forth, apparently searching for the Americans.
I was very impressed to see him at such low altitude doing those wing rolls. I was almost directly over him, so I actually eased my turn and flew ahead a little bit as he continued to turn. Then I overbanked, maybe 130 degrees of bank, and started pulling my nose down toward him.
The Phantom swoops in on his unsuspecting prey. It looks like Arwood will have an easy kill. But abruptly, the MiG brakes.
He apparently picked me up when he was left wing down. And then again, he made a very, very hard left-hand turn into me.
Through the right turn, the enemy again slips from view. But suddenly, Bart Bartholomew roars into the fight. Bartholomew is chasing his MiG here. Harwood is here. His MiG has slipped out of view here. As Bartholomew flies past, Harwood's MiG will turn in pursuit. Bartholomew thunders through. Harwood's MiG rolls right.
He reversed and then crossed across my nose. And as he crossed, then I was able to roll back into a perfect firing position. He was slightly above the horizon. I was maybe 10 degrees off his tail.
The MiG's concern for his fellow pilot is his undoing. Harwood fires.
It just came within maybe 10 feet or so to the right side of his tail, and it detonated. But initially it didn't appear to be any damage to the plane.
Pat says, "Geez, I missed." And about just as he said that, this big silver piece of fuselage came off. Looked out, boom. I see the MiG-19 up there, and a heavy wing rock, canopy comes off, and a seat comes out, and poof, here's this guy in the chute.
Harwood's MiG disintegrates just behind Bartholomew. Seconds later, Bartholomew gets good tone on his heat-seeking Sidewinder. His finger closes around the trigger. Incredibly, on their first mission over the north, Bartholomew and Harwood have scored MiGs in May for the Midway.
Here we were, both of us. All we had to do is make a 90-degree starboard turn, and we were right there in combat spread, 3/4 mile apart, and we were heading east, and we were heading out.
The MiG killers beat a hasty retreat to the Gulf of Tonkin. The MiG kills are only a small part of Midway's contribution to the air war over Vietnam on its third combat cruise. Flying off its deck, F-4 Phantoms, A-6 Intruders, and A-7 Corsairs mined key harbors, struck petroleum reserves, and destroyed key infrastructure targets in the north.
The advantage of having the carriers operating in the Gulf of Tonkin was that you were able to take an entire air group and send a couple of dozen aircraft against a single target relatively close to where that target was. So you would minimize the amount of warning that the air defense network the North Vietnamese had to react to that.
Midway continued daily combat operations over the north through the end of May. And just 6 days after Bartholomew and Harwood's dogfight, another pair of Phantoms will find themselves in the most perilous situation American airmen can face: a perfectly executed North Vietnamese ambush. May 23rd, 1972. Two F-4 Phantoms from USS Midway soar over the North Vietnamese countryside. They're flying combat air patrol for a strike against targets in Hai Phong, part of the continued effort to cripple the invasion of South Vietnam. The flight lead is Lieutenant Commander Muggs McEwen, with his Rio, Lieutenant Jack Ench.
Muggs and I don't know, we kind of hit it off early on. We had a sort of a warped sense of humor between us in the cockpit.
I used to tell him, I said, "Jack, this is the one thing I never wanted to die surprised. If my last conscious thought is what the hell was that, I'll hunt you through eternity and you'll never rest."
Flying off Muggs's wing is Lieutenant Mike Rabb, with his Rio, Lieutenant Junior Grade Ken Crandall. As they descend towards their cap station, their radio crackles to life.
Immediately called them and said, we have a vector for bandits, 278, 70 miles. And Jack said, Roger. I said, Jack, did he say bandits? He said, yeah, I think he did. I said, confirm bandits. He said, hey, Oswald, this is Bullet. Can you confirm bandits? He said, Roger, I confirm bandits. You're clear to arm, clear to fire. That's the defining moment of a fighter pilot.
Muggs adjusts his heading and moves toward the bandits, maintaining airspeed in minimum afterburner to conserve fuel. But their flight path takes them into the heart of enemy airspace, directly over Kep Airfield.
I can remember thinking to myself, man, this wasn't in our game plan. I don't think I like this very much.
Suddenly, Muggs gets a visual on the bandits. MiG-19s.
I looked down, and on the glint of the cartridge down low were two airplanes coming at us. And so I said, tally out 200 ridgeline, 7 miles. And Jack said, let's get them. I'm right behind you.
In combat spread, the Phantoms merge head-on with the MiGs. Ground clutter prevents any radar lock. This dogfight will be decided the old-fashioned way. Fearless, the enemy streaks through the American formation.
We had our fangs out, and oh boy, here's a quick kill. We're going to get these guys.
Muggs calls for a cross-turn.
You pull up and then you go this vertically and come back. That's a way of reversing course, and then you can keep your eye on the target.
Muggs goes high. Rab goes low. But just as they enter the maneuver, disaster.
Halfway through the turn, it was raining MiGs.
4 MiG-17s scream in directly towards them.
I said, oh, God. That's when I said they just called the bet and they raised us about 4. And I said, well, Jack, let's go. And I said, it's going to be homicide.
The Soviet-built MiG-17 is a swift and formidable opponent in close-quarters combat. At low speed, it can easily outturn the Navy F-4 Phantoms. The Americans are here. The MiG-17s are in a diving attack here, trying to hit the Phantoms while they're busy chasing the MiG-19s here.
They were coming down on us. I said, oh, God. So we just started extending out.
The lead MiG-17 roars past Muggs, canopy to canopy.
It passed so close that, I mean, you could feel the airplane pass by.
Muggs will move aggressively against the MiGs. He'll use a classic air combat maneuver called a low yo-yo. He'll rudder down, then pull the nose up, cutting inside the MiG's turn and increasing his airspeed. Muggs stomps the rudder, heart pounding. He breathes in ragged gasps through the crushing maneuver. As he pulls his nose through the horizon, he spots a MiG-19 just in front of him. He smoothly switches targets, the best strategy when surrounded by enemies. Muggs's best option for a shot is to barrel roll to the outside, improving his angle off the MiG's tail. Muggs pitches up and rolls. He skillfully coordinates the stick, rudder, and throttles as he rolls again. But suddenly, everything changes.
I saw a MiG-17 back at our 8 o'clock. And it wasn't shooting yet. It was coming up there, but he was gaining ground on us. So I told Muggs, I said, we got one at 8 o'clock, and he's starting to be a threat.
We had this working relationship where I said, Jack, don't ever tell me brake right or brake left, or you just tell me what's back there. I do the pilot stuff, you do the RO stuff.
The MiG on their tail begins to pull lead. The enemy's heavy cannon looms menacingly. Muggs is too low to dive away. The North Vietnamese pilot has him cornered. May 23rd, 1972. F-4 Phantom pilot Muggs McEwen and his Rio Jack Hench are staring down the barrel of a gun, a MiG-17 locked on their tail.
And I said, okay, that's it, Jack. Somebody's going to walk home. It's not going to be us.
Desperate times call for desperate measures. Muggs has a patented last-ditch maneuver for just this situation. He'll apply full forward stick and bottom rudder. Then, just as the enemy tries to compensate for the move, he'll pull hard back and boot top rudder. For a moment, the F-4 will depart or become uncontrollable and backflip. Muggs jams the stick forward and stomps the left rudder pedal, then pulls hard back. The F-4 tumbles. It's a maneuver as spectacular as it is gutsy, the domain of only the greatest fighter pilots.
We departed the airplane at about 1,500 feet, and it tumbled end over end, and Jack is saying, "What the hell are you doing?"
I'm trying to keep my eye on this MiG, and all of a sudden, I'm being thrown around in the cockpit, and I'm what are you doing up there? Then all of a sudden, the airplane scooped out, and he was in control again, and I'm looking back, and I finally got my eyes back there looking, where's that MiG? And it's gone. And he said, there's one right in front of us.
The astonished North Vietnamese pilot has been forced out in front of Muggs and Hench. Muggs gets good tone on his Sidewinder missile and fires.
MiG-17 could turn on a dime, and he defeated the missile's striking solution. So one of our Sidewinders was gone. We had 3 left.
The MiG-17 stays in his right turn, but Muggs can't pursue. He barrel rolls. With so many MiGs, he must keep moving, never sticking with one target for long.
Just trying to keep my energy up and keep from being predictable.
Muggs rolls out with another MiG-17 just off his nose. He gets good tone and fires a second AIM-9. But again, the tight-turning MiG defeats the missile lock.
This time, you know, well, this is probably on TV, so we won't say the words we were saying in the cockpit, but we were very frustrated at this point.
I said, you're not going to give it to me, are you, God? We're going to have to go home and tell everybody making excuses how we missed 4 MiGs.
But surrounded by the enemy, there's no time to reflect. The punishing fight goes on.
I'm checking back, and all of a sudden I see one at 4 o'clock, and this guy had made ground on us, and he was up there, and he was actually starting to shoot his 37mm cannon at us. And I called him Muggs, I said, 4 o'clock, tracking and shooting. And he looked back on it like that and said, holy expletive.
Orange tracers rip past the canopy. Muggs breaks hard into the attack. When suddenly, the MiG ceases fire.
He just pulled out in front of me here like this, and I looked up, and from my time in the MiG-17, it just went, you can't see me.
Muggs has managed to slip into the MiG's blind spot under its nose. To turn the tables, he'll chop the throttle, push forward on the stick, and open the speed brakes. The gut-wrenching negative G maneuver and loss of speed will force the MiG out in front of him. It's another brilliant move by a brilliant pilot. Muggs jams the stick forward and cuts power. The Bandit screams by in front of the Phantom.
It was about 50 feet away from his cockpit, where we could pick that guy out of a police lineup.
The MiG noses down and rolls back and forth in an apparent effort to reacquire the elusive American. For the third time, Muggs gets good tone on his enemy and fires a Sidewinder.
He broke into the missile. I thought, oh, God, we missed again. And I was feeling the depths of despair, and all of a sudden his tail came off.
I saw the missile go by the airplane, and I saw it go off, and I think it was proximity fuse. A piece of the airplane went off, and then pretty soon, the explosion, we saw the guy eject. So that was our first kill.
After 5 agonizing minutes of superhuman maneuvering, Muggs and Ench have a kill. But there's no time to celebrate. They spot their wingman, Mike Rabb, in the weeds with a MiG in hot pursuit.
I'm turning left, and I see Mike Rabb. He's heading north at the time with a MiG-17 all over him, just shooting. He's got tracers all around him.
Rabb is here. Muggs is here. He will guide Rabb on a heading that will drag the North Vietnamese in front of Muggs.
I said, okay, Mike, roll away from him and send out to the east.
Rabb drags the enemy MiG across his nose. Muggs pitches down. The expert MiG killer easily swings in on his enemy's 6. The MiG's tailpipe glows crimson just off his nose, a perfect target against the empty sky. Muggs fires his 4th Sidewinder of the day. The missile tracks straight and true.
We were euphoric in the cockpit, looking at soaking wet from sweat and drinking all the water we had and pounding on the canopy going, we realize what we just did. We got two big guns.
The rest of the MiGs have bugged out. They've lost their nerve in the face of such determined warriors. Euphoric, the Americans head back to the Midway. But the fighting isn't over. Before the conflict ends, the enemy will strike over water and bring the war to the Midway. January 12, 1973, the closing days of the Vietnam War. 2 Navy Phantoms catapult from Midway into an overcast sky. They're flying BARCAP, a barrier combat air patrol between the coast of North Vietnam and Midway. They'll intercept any MiGs that head out over the water towards American ships in the Gulf. Flying lead is Lieutenant Vic Kovaleski and his Rio, Jim Wise. Flying off his wing is Lieutenant Pat Arwood with his Rio, Ensign Lynn Oates. They arrive on station, and after a short time, the air controller breaks in over the radio. There's a bandit airborne, heading straight for Midway.
It was a real threat to the Midway, not only MiGs, but even surface craft to come out to challenge the carrier, because it would be quite a prize to sink or damage the Midway.
Now, she did have some point defense systems at the time, such as a surface-to-air missile defense battery. But just as in the Second World War, the primary defense for an aircraft carrier is her own embarked fighters.
The air controller vectors them in the direction of the enemy MiG.
As we were descending, Vic picked him up. It was about 11 o'clock position, and we were down in the 10,000 foot range. The MiG was maybe 12 miles or so.
The MiG is heading toward the Americans. At 2 miles, the North Vietnamese spots the big Phantoms and makes an about face.
The MiG appeared to be heading toward us, but he very quickly reversed course and started heading due north.
The communist pilot is in no mood to fight. Kowaleski pitches up and cuts back right to improve his angle off the MiG's tail. The powerful Phantom closes on its prey. The MiG breaks right to shake his pursuer. Kowaleski and Arwood must be cautious. Kowaleski closes to missile range. He gets good tone on his Sidewinder and fires.
Vic's first missile detonated by the tail. I'm sure that the MiG pilot knew that he was damaged, and it was probably more damage than we realized from a distance.
Kowaleski fires another Sidewinder.
When the second missile flew up the tailpipe and it exploded, the MiG pitched up violently into a 90-degree vertical position and just virtually stopped and rolled off to the right-hand side and then plummeted into the water.
This will prove to be the last MiG kill of the Vietnam War. On January 27, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords are signed, and American involvement in the Vietnam War comes to an end. Between 1965 and 1973, America claimed over 200 MiGs, 8 of which were downed by pilots of the USS Midway.
Midway had the benefit in providing the platform from which the very first and the very last confirmed MiG kills in the entire Vietnam War was scored.
Midway served throughout the Cold War, modernized again in 1986 and equipped with the new F-18 Hornet. She goes into combat for the last time in January 1991 as flagship of the Arabian Gulf Battle Force. During 43 days of combat, Midway flies 3,339 combat sorties, averaging 121 per day, delivering 2,000 tons of bombs and missiles on enemy targets. It is a stunning achievement and Midway's swan song.
In 1991, right after the successful conclusion of Operation Desert Storm, it was decided that the Midway would be retired a few years ahead of schedule. Age was catching up with her, and the fact that she just was too small to be operating the carrier aircraft that we had in the inventory.
After 47 years of service, Midway is decommissioned at Naval Air Station North Island, San Diego, April 11, 1992. As testament to her proud service in Vietnam and the Persian Gulf, she was spared the scrapyard.
It is now a museum in San Diego and is available for public viewing to look at a ship that basically was a milestone in carrier aviation history.
It is a fitting legacy for the men and women who served on Midway and the bold airmen who launched from her deck. Men who flew into hostile skies, faced determined and skilled opponents, and returned to Midway as MiG killers.
Trong niềm đau chất ngất, lối xưa không về, hẹn hò đành đơn sai. Ôi người đi chiều sơn la, mưa rơi nhòa nước mắt. Người đi xa trong niềm đau chất ngất, lối xưa không về, hẹn hò đành đơn sai. Ôi người đi về đâu khi nắng chiều phai, nắng úa xót xa thương người, chiều nào gục ngã trên đồi. Chim ru nhau về rừng ru anh ngu mãi, hình hài tan theo cỏ cháy, với người kiệt sức buông tay. Anh ở đây, anh ở đây, sao vẫn còn ở đây.
Trong suốt 21 năm chinh chiến, chúng ta đã có hàng ngàn bài tình ca và khúc quân hành cho những người lính, nhưng có rất ít những bài ca trong đoạn trường tù đầy gian khổ. Bài Anh ở đây của Trung tá Vũ Văn Sâm, tức nhạc sĩ Thục Vũ, đã được sáng tác ở trại tù Long Giao. Khi bị đưa ra trại tù miền Bắc, Trung tá Vũ Văn Sâm đã chết ở ngoài đó. Nhạc sĩ Vũ Đức Nghiêm đã viết thêm lời hai cho bài ca. Sau này vào thập niên 90, vợ con Trung tá Vũ Văn Sâm đã tìm ra mộ của ông, đã cải táng và đem di hài vào Sài Gòn. Nhưng linh hồn của Thục Vũ vẫn còn mãi mãi ở lại với bạn bè qua lời ca Anh ở đây mà quý vị vừa nghe trên đây.
Trong không hiểu một đồng quân thấp thoáng, núi cây rừng lặng tiếng nghe.
Thì tháng 7 thì tôi hai vợ chồng tôi đi trình diện và để bị bắt đi học tập cải tạo hết, cho nên là vợ xa chồng, cha xa con, mẹ xa con, thì cái cảnh đó gia đình tôi tan nát hết.
Tôi là Nguyễn Đình Tạo, ở tù 9 năm, từ Nam từ Long Giao ra Bắc và từ Bắc vô Trung, tức là trại Thanh Chương Nghệ Tĩnh, rồi từ Thanh Chương Nghệ Tĩnh trở về Z30A.
Tôi là Vũ Đức Nghiêm, cựu trung tá quân lực Việt Nam Cộng Hòa. Khi giặc Cộng chiếm miền Nam thì chúng tôi bị đi tù 13 năm, ra khỏi nhà tù ngày 1 tháng 9 năm 88.
Thì cái lúc mà mất nước thì chúng tôi theo lời của Cộng sản thì đi học tập chừng nửa tháng rồi về thôi.
Rồi chị học có nửa tháng thôi sao?
Dạ, nửa tháng rồi tiếp nửa tháng, rồi cứ vậy thôi.
Người ta được biết bác là nhà thơ Hà Thượng Nhân, nhưng mà tên thật bác là gì?
Phạm Xuân Minh.
Phạm Xuân Minh, Hà Thượng Nhân. Năm nay thì thưa bác được bao nhiêu tuổi rồi?
Tôi 90 tuổi rồi. 90
tuổi. Thì bác qua Hoa Kỳ năm nào?
Tôi sang năm Hoa Kỳ năm 1990.
90.
Lúc bây giờ 80 mấy rồi.
Thế tức là bác đi HO mấy?
HO 6.
Rồi. Tôi ở lại cũng giống như nhiều người khác, có thể vì hoàn cảnh này hay hoàn cảnh khác là mình không đi, cho tới lúc Cộng sản vào tới nơi thì có mặt ở mình ở đó. Mình cũng không lấy gì làm tiếc, là bởi vì trong bao nhiêu năm ở tù cũng học được nhiều lắm, học được cái tình người, học được cái sự mà kêu khổ sở, nhìn thấy rõ những người cộng sự với mình, họ cực khổ như nào thì mình cũng chia phần cực khổ với họ, thành ra tôi không có hối tiếc gì cả.
Anh em tôi là những người ở lại, cũng đi tù, cũng ra Bắc vào Nam, từng yên chân nơi nghĩa lộ văn bản, tưới mồ hôi xuống Hà Tây Thanh Hóa. Lũ chúng tôi không phải vài ba đứa, có hàng ngàn, hàng vạn kẻ bại vong, đem oan khiên ra giữa nước sông Hồng, mang uất hận chút lên rừng Yên Bái. Đứa gục xuống bón cây rừng Bắc Thái, cho lá xanh, cho rừng cội đơm hoa. Đứa truyền giao chính nghĩa khắp Nam Hà, cho lẽ phải sáng bừng trong đêm tối. Sức chúng tôi cũng mỏi mòn vì đói, kiếp lưu đày quên hết cả nhân sinh. Tiếc nuối gì đâu những buổi đăng trình, nuốt tủi nhục ôm riêng mình hệ lụy. Khi xa cơ trong kiếp sơn đầu khiếu, có ai đem thành bại luận anh hùng. Lũ chúng ta còn nợ nghiệp kiếm cung, chưa trả được nên suốt đời ân hận.
Bài thơ trên do chính tác giả đọc cho chúng tôi thu âm. Ông là Trung tá Nguyễn Đình Tạo, tức nhà thơ Đông Anh. Từ quê nhà, ông vào quân trường Đà Lạt năm 1954, sau đó chưa bao giờ gặp lại gia đình. Trải qua 21 năm chinh chiến, tiếp theo là 9 năm tù đầy từ Nam ra Bắc, định mệnh đắng cay đã không cho phép ông đoàn tụ với gia đình ở ngoài Bắc. Trung tá Nguyễn Đình Tạo, ngay sau khi ra khỏi nhà tù đã vượt biên bằng đường bộ. Không thành công, vượt biên bằng đường biển, bị mất đứa con trai. Sau cùng, đến Hoa Kỳ, làm người tị nạn xây dựng tương lai muộn màng với những vần thơ nặng tình chiến hữu.
Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay như màu đồng bào. Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay như màu anh nghe.
Hận thù đó cất cao trong lòng người, hận thù đó khắc sâu trong lòng tôi, lòng anh.
Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay chứng tích hận thù. Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay giết chóc hôi tanh.
Giặc thù đó xâm lăng, giặc thù đó bạo tạc, giặc thù đó giết hại dân lành, đốt phá quê hương.
Ôi vùng Chỉ Thiên an lòng, vùng Tam Biên lửa máu, từ vực sâu hận thù.
Dòng máu đỏ da vàng trên đất nghèo nàn đã đổ vì ai?
Vì giặc thù đốt phá quê hương ta, vì giặc thù bắt giết đồng bào ta,
vì giặc thù còn đó, vì giặc thù còn đó.
Anh em ơi vùng lên diệt bạo tàn,
anh em ơi vùng lên diệt xâm lăng.
Anh em ơi nếu có còn ta mới còn tự do là còn cơn no. Bàn tay như màu đồng bào. Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay như màu anh nghe.
Hận thù đó cất cao trong lòng người, hận thù đó khắc sâu trong lòng tôi, lòng anh.
Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay chứng tích hận thù. Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay giết chóc hôi tanh.
Giặc thù đó xâm lăng, giặc thù đó bạo tàn, giặc thù đó giết hại dân lành, đốt phá quê hương.
Ôi vùng Chỉ Thiên an lòng, vùng Tam Biên lửa máu, từ vực sâu hận thù.
Dòng máu đỏ da vàng trên đất nghèo nàn đã đổ vì ai?
Vì giặc thù đốt phá quê hương ta, vì giặc thù bắt giết đồng bào ta,
vì giặc thù còn đó, vì giặc thù còn đó.
Anh em ơi vùng lên diệt bạo tàn,
anh em ơi vùng lên diệt xâm lăng.
Anh em ơi nước nước còn ta mới
còn tự do là còn cơm no.
miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay như màu đồng bào. Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay như máu anh em.
Hận thù đó cất cao trong lòng người, hận thù đó khắc sâu trong lòng tôi, lòng anh.
Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay chứng tích hận thù. Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay giết chóc hôi tanh.
Giặc thù đó xâm lăng, giặc thù đó bạo tạc, giặc thù đó giết hại dân lành, đốt phá quê hương.
Tôi vùng Chỉ Thiên an lòng, vùng Tam Biên lửa máu, từ vực sâu hận thù.
Dòng máu đỏ da vàng trên đất nghèo nàn đã đổ vì ai?
Vì giặc thù đốt phá quê hương ta, vì giặc thù bắt giết đồng bào ta,
vì giặc thù còn đó, vì giặc thù còn đó.
Anh em ơi vùng lên dưới bao tang,
anh em ơi vùng lên dưới sông Lam.
Anh em ơi nếu có còn ta mới còn tự do là còn cơn no. Bàn tay như máu đồng bào. Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay như máu anh em.
Hận thù đó cất cao trong lòng người, hận thù đó khắc sâu trong lòng tôi, lòng anh.
Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay chứng tích hận thù. Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay giết chóc hôi tanh.
Giặc thù đó xâm lăng, giặc thù đó bạo tạc, giặc thù đó giết hại dân lành, đốt phá quê hương.
Ôi vùng Chỉ Thiên an lòng, vùng Tam Biên lửa máu, từ vực sâu hận thù.
Dòng máu đỏ da vàng trên đất nghèo nàn đã đổ vì ai?
Vì giặc thù đốt phá quê hương ta, vì giặc thù bắt giết đồng bào ta,
vì giặc thù còn đó, vì giặc thù còn đó.
Anh em ơi vùng lên dưới bao tang,
anh em ơi vùng lên dưới sông Lam.
Anh em ơi nước vô còn ta mới
còn tự do là còn cơm no.
Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay như máu đồng bào. Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay như máu anh em.
Hận thù đó cất cao trong lòng người, hận thù đó khắc sâu trong lòng tôi, lòng anh.
Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay chứng tích hận thù. Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay giết chóc hôi tanh.
Giặc thù đó xâm lăng, giặc thù đó bạo tạc, giặc thù đó giết hại dân lành, đốt phá quê hương.
Ôi vùng Chỉ Thiên an lòng, vùng Tam Biên
dòng máu đỏ da vàng trên đất nghèo nàn đã đổ vì ai?
Vì giặc thù đốt phá quê hương ta, vì giặc thù bắt giết đồng bào ta,
vì giặc thù còn đó, vì giặc thù còn đó.
Anh em ơi vùng lên diệt bao tàn,
anh em ơi vùng lên diệt sông Lam.
Anh em ơi nếu có còn ta mới còn tự do là còn cơn no. Bàn tay như máu đồng bào, giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay như máu anh em.
Hận thù đó cất cao trong lòng người, hận thù đó khắc sâu trong lòng tôi, lòng anh.
Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay chứng tích hận thù. Giặc từ miền Bắc vô đây, bàn tay giết chóc hôi tanh.
Giặc thù đó xâm lăng, giặc thù đó bạo tàn, giặc thù đó giết hại dân lành, đốt phá quê hương.
Ôi vùng Chỉ Thiên An Lộc, vùng tan biến lửa máu từ vực sâu hận thù.
Dòng máu đỏ da vàng trên đất nghèo nàn đã đổ vì ai?
Vì giặc thù đốt phá quê hương ta, vì giặc thù bắt giết đồng bào ta,
vì giặc thù còn đó, vì giặc thù còn đó.
Anh em ơi vùng lên diệt bao tàn,
anh em ơi vùng lên diệt sông Lam.
Anh em ơi nước vô còn ta mới
còn tự do là còn cơm no.
sức mạnh hào hùng quân dân, thể chưa bao lùi chân, ngồi cùng với quân
quân xâm lăng. Ta thà chết chứ không hề lui, quyết không hề phản bội quê hương. Ta thà chết chứ không hề lui, quyết không hề phản bội quê hương.
Cộng sản Việt Nam. Tội ác thứ nhất của Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam là tội cướp nước, giết chiêu bài giải phóng miền Nam, chống Mỹ xâm lược, nhưng thực chất là xâm lăng Việt Nam Cộng Hòa, nhằm đưa cả nước vào xã hội chủ nghĩa không tưởng theo lệnh của quan thầy Liên Xô, Trung Cộng. Hồ Chí Minh và bè lũ Cộng sản Bắc Việt đã xua quân cưỡng chiếm miền Nam, gây nên một cuộc chiến tranh tương tàn cốt nhục, đẫm máu và nước mắt, kéo dài suốt 20 năm, khiến cho hàng triệu người Việt phải chết thảm thương vì bom mìn, súng đạn. Nhà nhà đều phải mang vần khăn tang trắng, đau khổ trước cảnh chia ly, loạn lạc, tàn sát và hận thù. Tội ác thứ hai của Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam là tội bán nước. Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam đã tự ý dâng đất, nhượng biển cho tàu cộng nhằm đổi lấy quyền lợi cho cá nhân và phe đảng, là trái ngược với lịch sử ngàn đời của cha ông, từng đổ máu hy sinh, kiên cường đấu tranh để dựng nước và giữ nước. Tội ác thứ ba của Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam là tội buôn dân, cướp đất. Trong lịch sử chưa bao giờ người phụ nữ Việt Nam phải đi làm gái trên khắp xứ người, trẻ em phải sa vào kỹ nghệ tình dục, thanh niên phải làm lao nô để chủ nhân ngoại quốc đọa đầy bóc lột. Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam còn tham lam chiếm đất công, cướp đất từ để chia chác làm giàu trên nỗi đau khổ của hàng triệu dân oan, để họ phải sống vất vưởng không nhà không cửa, chết thảm thương ngoài đầu đường xó chợ hay nơi vùng kinh tế mới rừng thiêng nước độc. Tội ác thứ tư của Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam là tội ác phản dân tộc. Trải qua 1000 năm nô lệ bởi giặc Tàu, 100 năm bị đô hộ bởi thực dân, dân tộc Việt Nam đã phải sống trong điêu linh nhục nhằn thống khổ, cho đến khi Đệ Nhị Thế Chiến chấm dứt mới được trao trả tự do độc lập. Thì Hồ Chí Minh và bè Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam lại mang tà thuyết phản dân tộc là chủ nghĩa xã hội, để biến Việt Nam thành một nước xã hội chủ nghĩa, gây bao cảnh chết chóc tang thương, hãi hùng, máu thấm sâu lòng đất, xương phơi trắng Trường Sơn, và bể đông trôi nổi xác người dân lành vô tội. Tội ác thứ năm là tội giết người thủ tiêu, bịt miệng. Hễ ai không đồng ý đồng tâm với mình thì Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam lập tức tìm cách giết người thủ tiêu, bịt miệng. Từ những việc thanh toán đối lập đến vu vạ giết sạch địa chủ cường hào, nhân vật giai phẩm, Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam đã pháo kích, giật miền, giết người bừa bãi, thậm chí còn dã man chôn sống hàng ngàn dân lành vô tội trong ngày Tết thiêng liêng cổ truyền của dân tộc, để tiếng kêu than khóc vọng thấu trời xanh. Tội ác thứ 6 của Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam là dùng bạo lực sắt máu áp đặt lên đầu dân tộc Việt, bắt phải theo chủ nghĩa xã hội, từ chối ông bà tổ tiên, từ bỏ niềm tin tôn giáo thiêng liêng, xúc phạm cả đến trời, đến Chúa, đến Phật. Để tôn thờ quan thầy Cộng sản lê lên khăn mát, Đảng là trên hết, Đảng nhập nhằng giữa Đảng với Tổ quốc. Cờ máu của Đảng là cờ của Tổ quốc. Tội ác này là tội ác cưỡng ép mọi người phải vô thần, vô gia đình, vô Tổ quốc, khiến con phải tố cha, vợ tố chồng, anh em sẵn sàng giết hại lẫn nhau vì Bác và Đảng. Tội ác thứ 7 của Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam là tội tham nhũng, thối nát, bóc lột, lừa đảo nhân dân. Đây là chủ trương quốc sách của Đảng, khiến cho bao người phải trắng tay, nghèo nàn cơ cực, nhân dân bữa đói bữa no, ốm đau chẳng ai lo, sống chẳng khác nào như dân nô lệ, phải làm tôi mọi xứ người. Tội ác thứ 8 của Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam là tội vô văn hóa giáo dục, lấy tư tưởng Hồ Chí Minh, kẻ tội đồ số 1 của dân tộc. Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam đã áp dụng kế hoạch 100 năm trồng người nhằm đào tạo con người trở thành những kẻ sát máu vô nhân tính, lãnh cảm, dửng dưng trước những nỗi đau thương của đồng loại. Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam điên cuồng theo đuổi chủ nghĩa ngoại lai, phản dân hại nước, lại xem đó là kim chỉ nam xây dựng con người. Chính vì vậy mà tuổi trẻ Việt Nam mất định hướng, đất nước Việt Nam không có tương lai, và con người Việt Nam bỗng dưng chủ bại, dân tộc sinh yếu hèn. Tội ác thứ 9 là Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam đã làm cho xã hội mỗi ngày một suy đồi, với chính sách ngu dân để trị, bần cùng hóa nhân dân để dễ bề kìm kẹp, dùng hào nhoáng, ăn chơi trụy lạc che mắt thế gian, lấy phồn vinh giả tạo để mị dân. Từ đó hú giàu nghèo cách biệt, không công việc làm, trai sinh ra trộm cướp giết người, ma túy xì ke đầy rẫy, phụ nữ thì đứng đường bán thân nuôi miệng, giang hồ phiêu bạc, làm dâu xứ người, mang nỗi nhục quốc thể. Tội ác thứ 10 của Đảng Cộng sản Việt Nam là khôn nhà dại chợ. Bên trong thì đàn áp bịt miệng, cướp của giết người, bên ngoài thì khiếp nhược yếu hèn, sẵn sàng cầu vinh bán nước. Do đó chuyện mất nước bại vong nay mai xảy ra là điều khó tránh được. Đất nước Việt Nam rồi đây sẽ bị xóa tên trên bản đồ thế giới. Dân tộc Việt Nam sẽ bị đồng hóa bởi Tàu Cộng và trở lại một thời kỳ nô lệ như đã có từ ngàn năm trước.